My name is Elijah Vance, and I am, by profession and by calling, a park ranger with the National Park Service. For the past 7 years, I have dedicated my career to the stewardship of America's natural and historical treasures. My previous postings, primarily in the more temperate and, I suppose, predictable landscapes of the Southeast, were characterized by routine, trail maintenance, visitor education, the occasional lost hiker, the rhythm of seasons turning through familiar forests. My commission encompasses resource protection, visitor safety, and interpretive programming, duties I have always undertaken with a profound sense of responsibility. The path to a permanent position within the service is, as many know, a competitive one, often demanding flexibility and a willingness to embrace assignments in less sought-after locales. It was this understanding, coupled with a desire for a new challenge, that led me to accept the transfer to West Wind Bluffs. West Wind Bluffs is a somewhat overlooked sector, a sprawling expanse of dune and forest, pressed against the vast, moody expanse of Lake Michigan, falling under the administrative umbrella of a larger, more recognized Indiana Park entity. My new station was a modest, somewhat isolated affair. A small, sturdy building nestled amongst a stand of mature black oaks, its windows gazing out towards the ever-shifting lines of the Great Dunes. The wind, a constant presence here, carried the scent of pine, damp earth, and the distant fresh tang of the lake. My initial apprehension regarding the solitude was tempered by a professional curiosity, an eagerness to learn the unique cadences of this new territory. The first days were a blur of settling in, organizing the compact office space within the station, calibrating equipment, and poring over topographical maps that detailed the sector's intricate network of trails, wetlands, and designated wilderness areas. My initial patrols were largely dedicated to familiarization. West Wind Bluffs was at high, place of stark, compelling beauty. The dunes themselves, colossal waves of sand frozen in mid-crest, rolled inland from the lake, their slopes sparsely vegetated with hardy marram grass that hissed in the wind. Beyond them, dense oak savannas, dominated by the gnarled limbs of black oaks and the occasional towering white pine, gave way to sprawling marshes and the shadowy depths of a significant peat bog, an area designated on my maps as the Blackwood Mire. The park boasted a remarkable biodiversity. Official literature mentioned over 1,100 species of flowering plants, from the delicate blooms of prairie wildflowers to the more sinister allure of predaceous bog plants that thrived in the acidic waters of the mire. The air hummed with the sounds of insects, the calls of myriad bird species, and always the underlying sigh or roar of Lake Michigan, a sound that permeated every moment like a vast aquatic heartbeat. The solitude, initially, was a balm. Long hours were spent walking the trails, checking for erosion or fallen trees, ensuring signage was intact, and simply observing. The silence of the deep woods, broken only by the rustle of unseen creatures or the cry of a hawk, was a profound contrast to the more populated parks of my past. It was a quiet, stark existence, and for a time, I found a measure of peace in it. It was perhaps a week into my tenure, during a routine patrol along a less frequented trail that skirted the edge of the mobile dune system, an area known for its dramatically shifting sands, reminiscent of the famed Mount Baldy further along the coast, that I encountered the first discordant note in the park's quiet symphony. Partially buried in the loose sand at the base of a steep dune slip face, looking as though the wind had only just uncovered it, was a child's boot. It was small, made of dark, heavily worn leather, and clearly antiquated. I knelt, brushing away the clinging sand. The leather was stiff, cracked in places, the sole almost worn through. It was a high-ankled boot with a row of tiny, corroded metal eyelets for laces, though no laces remained. It was undeniably old, perhaps dating from the late 19th or early 20th century. Such finds were not entirely unheard of in areas with long histories of settlement, but this felt different, imbued with a peculiar sense of desolation. I carefully excavated it, turning it over in my gloved hands. There was no sign of its partner. I bagged it, intending to log it as a potential historical artifact, yet a strange, unwelcome prickle of unease traced its way down my spine. A half-forgotten fragment of folklore surfaced in my mind. Tales of concealed shoes, apotropaic charms hidden in old buildings to ward off evil. I dismissed it, of course, as an irrelevant, fanciful notion. This was simply an old boot, a relic of a bygone era, uncovered by the relentless, indifferent wind. The unease, however, proved more stubborn than the logic I applied to it. In the days that followed, I found myself more attuned to the park's subtle undercurrents. Sometimes, particularly at dusk, when the light bled from the sky and shadows pooled deep beneath the trees, I would hear things. Or, rather, I thought I heard them. Faint whispers, seemingly carried on the wind that rustled through the dune grasses. Too indistinct to be words, yet undeniably there, just at the edge of perception. It was easy to attribute them to the acoustics of the dunes, the way sound can travel and distort across the undulating landscape, or perhaps the simple effect of solitude on the human mind. During a supply run to the main park headquarters, I had a brief conversation with a senior ranger, a man named Henderson, who had worked in the Indiana Dune system for over 30 years. He was a laconic, weather-beaten man, his face a roadmap of sun and wind. When I mentioned my posting at Westwind Bluffs, his eyes, normally crinkled with good humor, seemed to cloud over for a moment. "Westwind, eh?" he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "Quiet out there, too quiet sometimes." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "The dunes, they remember things, Vance. And the lake. Well, the lake has its own voices. Best not to listen too closely to either." He'd clap me on the shoulder then, a dismissive gesture, and change the subject to quarterly budget reports, leaving me to ponder his cryptic words. I filed it away as local colour, the kind of poetic pronouncements old-timers in isolated places are sometimes prone to. The culmination of this mounting disquiet arrived on a moonless night, a week or so after my conversation with Henderson. I was at my station, finishing up some paperwork, the only light the glow of my desk lamp against the profound darkness outside. The wind was up, a low moan around the eaves of the small building. Suddenly, a sharp, distinct rapping sound echoed from the main window, the one that faced the dense stand of oaks. 3 quick, hard knocks. My head snapped up, heart lurching. I was out of my chair in an instant, flashlight in hand, peering through the glass. Nothing. Only the black silhouettes of the trees swaying against a starless sky. I unlatched the door, stepped out onto the small porch, and swept the flashlight beam across the clearing. The wind whipped at my face, carrying the scent of rain. There were no footprints in the sandy soil around the station, no sign of any person or animal large enough to make such a sound. I circled the entire building. Nothing. As I stood there, a profound sense of vulnerability washed over me. The vast, dark expanse of the park seemed to press in from all sides. And then, carried on a sudden gust of wind, I heard it, or thought I did. A sound so faint it was almost a hallucination. A high, thin wail that could have been a child's distant cry, or perhaps, more chillingly, a faint, almost inaudible peal of laughter. It was gone as quickly as it came, swallowed by the moan of the wind. I told myself it was an owl, a fox, the wind itself playing tricks. But as I retreated into the relative safety of the station, bolting the door behind me, the image of that small solitary leather boot lying catalogued in an evidence bag on my desk flashed in my mind, and I knew with a certainty that defied all reason that something in West Wind Bluffs was terribly, terribly wrong. The days following the incident at the station window were characterized by a heightened, almost painful awareness. Sleep became a shallow, restless affair, punctuated by the imagined creak of a floorboard or the sigh of the wind, which now seemed to carry a more deliberate, sibilant quality. I redoubled my efforts to find logical explanations for what I had experienced. The rapping, I reasoned, could have been a branch, dislodged by the wind, striking the glass with unusual force. The faint wail, a trick of acoustics, the cry of a nocturnal animal carried from afar. Perhaps a fox, or one of the many species of owls that inhabited the dense woodlands. Yet, the image of that small, antiquated boot remained stubbornly fixed in my mind, a tangible anchor for the formless dread that had begun to permeate my thoughts. My professional training, the years spent in the rational, ordered world of resource management and public safety, warred with a primal instinct that whispered of things unseen and unknown. I found myself drawn, with a morbid sort of compulsion, to the Blackwood Mire. It was a significant peat bog, a sprawling, shadowy expanse marked on my maps as a place of ecological importance, but also one that held a palpable sense of isolation. The trails leading to its periphery were less maintained, the forest pressing in close, the air growing heavy and damp the deeper one ventured. The mire itself was a landscape of stark, eerie beauty. Stunted, gnarled tamaracks and black spruce rose from the acidic tea-coloured water, their branches draped with wisps of old man's beard lichen, giving them a spectral skeletal appearance. The ground beneath the sparse boardwalk sections was a treacherous carpet of sphagnum moss, pitcher plants and sundews, their carnivorous nature a subtle, unsettling counterpoint to the delicate orchids that also thrived in this unique, acidic environment. The light here was different, filtered and diffuse, even on the brightest days, lending the entire area an underwater, dreamlike quality. Sounds were muffled, absorbed by the peat and the dense vegetation, creating an almost preternatural stillness broken only by the buzzing of insects or the sudden, startling croak of a hidden frog. It was during one such patrol, pushing deeper into the mire than I had previously ventured, that I made the second discovery. The boardwalk had long since given way to a narrow, muddy deer trail that wound precariously between stagnant pools. The air was thick with the smell of decay, the rich, loamy scent of centuries of decomposing plant matter. Partially submerged in the black, peaty water, tangled in the roots of a fallen tamarack, was a doll. Like the boot, it was clearly old, its porcelain face cracked and stained, one painted blue eye staring blankly up at the filtered sky. Its calico dress was rotted and discoloured, clinging to its sodden cloth body. I carefully extricated it from the mire, the cold black water seeping into my gloves. The doll was surprisingly heavy, its cloth limbs waterlogged. As I turned it over, a small silver locket, tarnished with age, fell from the folds of its dress and splashed into the water. I retrieved it, prying open the delicate clasp with my thumbnail. Inside, protected by a surprisingly intact sliver of glass, was a miniature, sepia-toned photograph of a young girl, no older than 7 or 8, with wide, serious eyes and dark hair pulled back from her face. Her expression was somber, almost melancholic. A chill, unrelated to the damp air of the bog, settled over me. The boot, now the doll, children's things, lost to time, swallowed by the indifferent landscape. But the mire felt different from the dunes. The dunes, for all their shifting, unpredictable nature, felt open, exposed to the sky and the wind. The mire felt secretive, ancient, a place that held its secrets close. I bagged the doll and the locket, my unease deepening into a more profound disquiet. Henderson's words about the dunes remembering and the lake having its own voices echoed in my mind. What did the mire remember? That night, the whispers returned, more insistent than before. I was in my small living quarters attached to the station. The park plunged into the deep, rural darkness that was still unfamiliar to me. The wind, a constant companion in west wind bluffs, seemed to probe at the corners of the building, seeking entry. The whispers were no longer just at the edge of hearing. They seemed to emanate from the very walls around me, faint and indistinct, yet undeniably present. I tried to focus on my reading, on reports, on anything that would anchor me to the mundane, but the sounds were insidious, weaving themselves into the fabric of the silence. And then I heard a new sound, one that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, a soft, rhythmic thumping, like a small, insistent heartbeat coming from beneath the floorboards. I froze, listening. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, deliberate. My own heart hammered in my chest. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, my service pistol feeling cold and unfamiliar in my suddenly clammy hand. The station was built on a shallow crawl space. With trepidation, I went outside, the night air cold, against my face. The access panel to the crawl space was at the rear of the building. My hands trembled as I unlatched it, the metal groaning in protest. I shone the flashlight beam into the dark, dusty space. Cobwebs, the underside of the floor joists, the sandy earth. Nothing. But the thumping, I realized with a fresh wave of dread, was louder here, closer. Steeling myself, I crawled into the narrow space, the flashlight beam cutting a swathe through the darkness. The air was stale, smelling of damp earth and something else, something faintly sweet and cloying. The thumping continued, seeming to come from directly beneath the main room of the station. I crawled forward, my knees and elbows scraping against the rough ground, and then I saw it. Partially buried in the sandy soil, directly beneath where my desk stood, was a small wooden box. It was old, the wood dark and weathered, bound with tarnished brass fittings. The thumping was coming from inside it. For a long moment, I could only stare, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This was impossible. This was beyond any rational explanation. The thumping stopped. Silence descended, thick and absolute, broken only by my own ragged breathing. Slowly, cautiously, I reached out a gloved hand and brushed away the loose soil from the top of the box. There was no lock, only a simple clasp. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled recklessness, I unfastened it and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried leaves and faded fabric, was a human heart. It was discolored, shrunken, yet unmistakably a heart. And as I stared, horrified, it gave a single, weak, convulsive beat. I recoiled, scrambling backwards, hitting my head on a low joist. The flashlight clattered from my grasp, plunging the crawl space into near total darkness. save for the thin beam now pointing uselessly at the earthen wall. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I fumbled for the flashlight, my fingers closing around its metallic casing, and scrambled out of the crawl space, gasping for air, the image of that beating heart seared into my retinas. Back in the station, I slammed the access panel shut, my body shaking uncontrollably. I paced the small room, my mind reeling. A child's boot, a doll with a locket, and now this abomination. What dark history was buried beneath Westwind Bluffs? What unseen presence was making itself known in these horrifying piecemeal revelations? The folklore I'd casually dismissed, tales of apotropaic charms, of things hidden to ward off evil, now seemed less like fanciful notions and more like desperate, forgotten warnings. The wind howled outside, no longer a mere atmospheric phenomenon, but a mournful, knowing voice, and as I stood there, isolated in the vast, dark expanse of the park, a new sound joined the wind's lament, the faint, unmistakable sound of a child, humming a simple, tuneless melody, seeming to come from just beyond the tree line. It was a sound both innocent and profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. The solitude of Westwind Bluffs was no longer a balm. It was a suffocating, watchful presence. And I was beginning to understand that I was not alone here. Not at all. The image of that grotesque, feebly pulsing heart, nestled in its crude wooden box beneath my station, burned itself onto my consciousness with the searing permanence of a brand. For what felt like an eternity, I remained frozen in the main room, the thin walls of the station offering no solace against the profound, existential dread that had enveloped me. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, and a cold sweat slicked my skin despite the chill of the night air. The humming I'd heard from the tree line, that innocent, tuneless melody, now seemed inextricably linked to the horror I had unearthed. It was the sound of madness, a lullaby for the damned. My first coherent thought was to flee, to abandon Westwind Bluffs, the National Park Service, everything. But where would I go? And who would believe such a tale? A park ranger driven from his post by a disembodied, beating heart and the ghost of a humming child. They'd deem me insane, and perhaps they'd be right. The alternative, to report it, felt equally impossible. What would I even say? How could I explain the inexplicable without sounding like a man unhinged by solitude? The box, the heart, it defied all known laws of nature, a relic of some forgotten, nightmarish ritual. After hours of agonizing indecision, fueled by a potent cocktail of terror and a desperate need for self-preservation, I made a choice. Or, rather, a compulsion drove me. I couldn't leave it there, under my feet, a constant throbbing reminder of the unholy secret Westwind Bluffs harbored. Just before the grey light of dawn began to bleed into the sky, I forced myself back to the crawl space. Armed with a shovel and the same heavy-duty flashlight, I retrieved the wooden box. The heart within was still, thankfully, but the faint, sweet, cloying odour I'd noticed before seemed stronger now, almost suffocating. I didn't dare open the lid again. I carried it, with a revulsion that made my skin crawl, deep into the black oak savanna that bordered the station, far from any marked trail. There, under the indifferent gaze of the ancient trees, I dug a hole and reburied the cursed thing, marking the spot with a nondescript stone, a secret between myself and the tainted earth. Sleep offered no escape that day, only a series of disjointed, feverish nightmares. The humming, however, did not return immediately. For a few days, an uneasy quiet settled over West Wind Bluffs, a silence that felt more like a held breath than genuine peace. I threw myself into my duties with a frantic energy, patrolling the most distant trails, checking signage, clearing minor deadfalls, anything to occupy my mind, to impose a semblance of order on the encroaching chaos. But the solitude I had once found comforting now felt oppressive. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig, a potential harbinger of renewed horror. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I decided to visit the small archival library at the main park headquarters, a good hour's drive from my isolated station. I concocted a plausible reason for my visit, research for interpretive programs, and hoped Henderson wouldn't be there. I couldn't face his knowing, laconic gaze again. The library was a dusty, quiet place, filled with old ranger logs, local historical monographs, and brittle, yellowed newspaper clippings. I started with West Wind Bluffs, looking for any mention of unusual occurrences, disappearances, or strange local folklore. Much of what I found was mundane, accounts of early settlements, logging operations, the establishment of the park. But then, tucked away in a folder of miscellaneous historical articles, I found her. Alice Mabel Gray, Diana of the Dunes. The articles, some dating back to the early 1900s, painted a picture of an educated woman who had forsaken Chicago society for a solitary life in the dunes, seeking a profound connection with nature. They spoke of her as a nymph, a hermit, a figure of local legend even during her lifetime. Then I found the accounts of her death in 1925 from uremic poisoning. I delved into what little medical information the archive offered on the condition: nausea, cognitive dysfunction, fatigue, and, in severe cases, a strange phenomenon known as uremic frost. Crystals of urea forming on the skin, giving it a frosted appearance, and a peculiar, ammonia-like odor to the breath. A chill traced its way down my spine. The faint, sweet, cloying odor from the box. Could it have been that? The articles mentioned that Diana's ghost was said to haunt the shores, a naked spectral woman seen running along the beach before, disappearing into Lake Michigan. But there was nothing about a child, nothing about humming. I also found a brief, almost dismissive mention of older Potawatomi legends concerning the region, tales of powerful water spirits, or Mishipeshu, the underwater panther, a horned, scaled creature said to guard the depths of the Great Lakes and demand appeasement for safe passage. Some accounts described it as a bringer of misfortune, capable of stirring storms and dragging victims to watery graves. There were also tales of the great horned serpent, an adversary of the thunderbird, a creature of chaos and darkness. Another folder contained a curious collection of clippings about wild children sighted in northern Indiana over the decades, including one near Michigan City in the 19th century, described as hairy and fleet-footed, with a fondness for water. None of it formed a coherent picture, only a disturbing mosaic of tragedy, folklore, and unexplained phenomena. When I returned to my station at West Wind Bluffs, the atmosphere felt different, heavier. The brief respite was over. That evening, as dusk settled, the humming began again, faint at first, then closer, seeming to emanate from just outside the window, the same window where the rapping had occurred. I peered out, my heart pounding, but saw nothing but the swaying black oaks. This time, however, the humming was accompanied by something new, a soft, rhythmic scratching at the door, like a small animal or a child's fingernails. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I sat at my desk, the service pistol on the blotter before me, listening as the scratching continued, punctuated by the faint, almost inaudible humming. It went on for hours, just as I thought I might truly lose my mind. It stopped. Silence returned, but it was a charged, malevolent silence. The next day, I found them. Small, muddy footprints, too small for an adult, leading from the edge of the Blackwood Mire towards my station, and then away again, back towards the bog. And near the doorstep, almost hidden in the sandy soil, was a crudely drawn picture, scratched into a piece of birch bark. It depicted a stick figure, unmistakably me, standing beside a larger, more menacing figure with what looked like horns, and next to them, a small, smiling child. Below the drawing was a single, clumsily formed word, soon. The mire. It was always the mire. Despite every rational instinct screaming at me to stay away, I knew I had to go back. The boot, the doll, the locket, they had come from there, or near there. The footprints led to and from its murky depths. Whatever entity was tormenting me, its locus seemed to be that dark, fetid place. With a grim sense of inevitability, I prepared for another patrol into the Blackwood Mire. This time, I wasn't just observing, I was hunting for something, though I didn't know what. Or perhaps I was being hunted. As I approached the familiar, gnarled tamaracks and the still black water, the air grew heavy. The usual sounds of insects and frogs strangely absent. The silence was absolute, unnerving. I pushed deeper than before, my boots sinking into the treacherous peat, the scent of decay thick in my nostrils. It was near the spot where I'd found the doll that I saw it, not another lost toy, nor a relic from a forgotten past. Partially submerged in the stagnant water, its surface filmed with an iridescent sheen, was a freshly severed deer leg, the bone gleaming white against the dark peat. And beside it, arranged, in a neat, deliberate circle, were 7 small, smooth stones, identical to the one I had used to mark the burial site of the hideous heart. My blood ran cold. It was a message, a marker, an invitation. And then, from the dense screen of skeletal spruce trees just ahead, I heard it again, the humming, closer now than ever before, and with it, a soft, childish giggle that echoed across the unnaturally still water, a sound that promised not innocence, but unimaginable horrors yet to come. The sight of the severed deer leg, the blood still dark and glistening on the pale exposed bone, and the circle of 7 smooth stones, my stones, the ones I had used to mark the unholy grave of that beating heart, sent a jolt of icy terror through me that was more profound than anything I had yet experienced. This wasn't random. This wasn't a wild animal's kill. This was a calculated act, a desecration, a direct and horrifying response to my own desperate attempt to conceal the evil I had unearthed. The humming, now accompanied by that soft, almost playful giggle, seemed to mock me from the impenetrable depths of the spruce trees ahead. It knew. Whatever it was, it knew what I had done, and it was showing me in the most gruesome way imaginable that my actions were futile. My training, my ingrained sense of duty as a park ranger, screamed at me to investigate, to document, to understand. But a more primal, overwhelming instinct urged me to turn and run, to flee West Wind Bluffs and never look back. The air in the Blackwood Mire grew colder, the silence between the giggles and hums pressing in on me, heavy and suffocating. The usual chorus of insects and frogs was utterly absent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I was alone, utterly alone with something ancient and malevolent. I backed away slowly, my hand instinctively going to the service pistol holstered at my hip. The weight of it, usually a comfort, felt insignificant against the scale of the dread that filled the mire. The giggling intensified, and I saw a flicker of movement in the deep shadows between the gnarled tamaracks. Something small, child-sized. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice a pathetic tremor in the vast stillness. The only answer was another peal of laughter, closer this time, and the distinct, soft patter of small feet on damp earth. The birch bark drawing flashed in my mind, the stick figure of me, the smiling child, and the larger, horned figure. Soon, the word echoed in my thoughts, a death knell. This was it. This was what it had been leading to. A desperate, reckless anger surged through me, momentarily eclipsing the fear. I wouldn't be toyed with, hunted like an animal in my own park. "Show yourself!" I yelled, my voice cracking. The humming stopped, the giggling ceased. For a heart-stopping moment, there was only the profound, dead silence of the bog. Then, a small figure stepped out from behind a thicket of skeletal black spruce. It was a child, a girl, no older than 7 or 8, with wide dark eyes and hair matted with leaves and what looked like black peat. She wore a simple tattered dress, the fabric faded and stained, reminiscent of the doll I had found. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim filtered light of the mire, and her feet were bare, caked in mud. She wasn't smiling now. Her expression was eerily blank, her dark eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. "What do you want?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't speak. Instead, she slowly raised a small hand and beckoned me forward, deeper into the mire. Towards the place where the deer leg lay, towards the unseen source of the earlier humming. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to run. But my feet felt rooted to the spot, my will sapped by those empty, staring eyes. It was as if an invisible tether connected us, drawing me forward against my own volition. I took a step, then another, my boots squelching in the soft, yielding peat. The air grew colder, and the faint, sweet, cloying odour I remembered from the crawl space under the station returned, stronger now, mixed with the damp, earthy smell of decay. As I drew closer, the child turned and began to walk slowly into the dense stand of spruce, glancing back once to ensure I was following. I moved as if in a trance, the world around me narrowing to the small, retreating figure and the oppressive, watchful silence of the blackwood mire. We emerged into a small, circular clearing, a place I hadn't seen on any map. The ground here was blacker, the water in the surrounding pools more stagnant, reflecting the grey sky like dead eyes. In the centre of the clearing, a massive, ancient-looking black oak stood, its branches twisted and bare, like skeletal arms reaching towards the heavens, and at its base, half-seated, half-reclining against the gnarled roots, was the horned figure from the drawing. It was larger than a man, its form difficult to discern in the deep shadows, yet undeniably powerful. Its silhouette was massive, hunched, with a great rack of what looked like deer or elk antlers crowning its head, though they seemed darker, almost metallic in the dim light. 2 points of reddish light glowed from where its eyes should be, fixed on me with an ancient, predatory intelligence. The air around it shimmered, and the cloying, sweet scent was almost overpowering. This was no mere ghost. This was something primal, something that had dwelled in the dark places of the earth since long before any human settlement. The Potawatomi legends of the Mishipeshu, the underwater panther, the horned guardian of the waters, flashed through my terrified mind. A creature of immense power, demanding appeasement. The child stopped a few feet from the horned entity and turned to face me, her expression still blank. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. A wide, unnatural smile that didn't reach her eyes. She raised her hand, again, not beckoning this time, but pointing towards me, then towards the horned figure. An offering. The red eyes of the creature seemed to flare. A low sound emanated from it, a deep, guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground, through my very bones. It wasn't a sound of this world. It was the sound of ancient hunger, of power absolute and indifferent to human suffering. Panic, raw, and undiluted, finally broke the spell. I fumbled for my pistol, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. I raised it, aiming at the shadowy mass of the horned figure, but my hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold it steady. What good would bullets do against something like this? The child giggled again, that same soft, playful sound, as if my terror was a delightful game. The horned entity began to rise, unfolding itself from the base of the tree, its true height becoming terrifyingly apparent. It was immense, a being of shadow and ancient wood, and something else, something unnameable. I fired. Once, twice, 3 times. The shots were deafening in the stillness of the mire, the muzzle flashes momentarily illuminating the horrifying scene. The bullets struck the creature with wet, thudding sounds, but it didn't flinch, didn't slow. It continued to rise, the red eyes burning into me. I knew then that I was going to die. There would be no escape, no rescue. The park, this beautiful, terrible place, would claim me, just as it had claimed the owner of the small leather boot, the child who had cherished the porcelain doll, and who knew how many others over the centuries. Westwind Bluffs held its secrets tightly, and I had stumbled too close. The child began to hum again, that same tuneless, innocent melody, as the horned figure took a step towards me, its shadow falling over me like a shroud. The sweet, cloying scent filled my lungs, and a profound, unnatural weariness settled over me. My vision began to blur at the edges. The last thing I saw clearly were the child's dark, empty eyes and the faint, triumphant curve of her lips.